General Hospital spoilers for reveal that Lulu found herself unable to ignore the truth any longer. Now that she knew about Joe's true parentage, she couldn't just sit back and allow Brooklyn and Lois to control the narrative. Gio had a right to know who he really was. He had a right to his father. He had a right to his place in the world. But ensuring that those rights were recognized was not going to be easy, especially with Brooklyn and Dante standing on opposite sides of an already explosive situation. Brooklyn had spent years weaving a web of secrecy, making decisions that she believed were in Joe's best interest, but in reality, she had stripped him of something fundamental, his identity. And now, with the truth threatening to surface, she was fighting to hold on to control. Lulu could see it clearly in her actions, in her desperate attempts to justify why she had kept the secret for so long. But Lulu wasn't buying it. Brooklyn had no right to dictate the terms of Joe's life, not when Dante was his father, and not when Lulu now held the truth in her hands. Dante, on the other hand, was caught in the middle, trapped between his growing anger toward Brooklyn and his confusion over how to handle what came next. He had spent years unknowingly missing out on his son's life, and now, that time could never be reclaimed. Lulu could see the turmoil in his eyes every time the topic came up. Was he ready to be a father to a child he never knew existed? Or was he struggling to process the sheer weight of Brooklyn's betrayal? Either way, Gio was the one suffering in the middle of it all. Lulu couldn't stand by and allow the chaos to dictate Joe's fate. He deserved protection. He deserved stability. He deserved to be acknowledged as Dante's son in every possible way. But Brooklyn's resistance was making things impossible, and Dante's hesitation wasn't helping either. Tensions boiled over when Lulu decided to take matters into her own hands. If Brooklyn and Dante were too caught up in their emotions to see what needed to be done, then she would ensure that Joe's rights were secured, no matter what it took. She knew that making a legal move could be risky, but if it meant protecting Joe's future, she was willing to take that risk. Brooklyn saw Lulu's interference as a direct threat, fearing that she was about to lose the last shred of control she had left over Joe's life. The battle lines were drawn, and it was no longer just about who had kept secrets, it was about who had the right to decide what happened next. Dante, torn between his loyalty to Brooklyn and his growing sense of responsibility toward Gio, was now faced with an impossible decision. Would he stand by Brooklyn, or would he allow Lulu to fight for Joe's rights, knowing that she was doing what he hadn't yet found the courage to do himself? The fight for Gio had only just begun, and as emotions ran high, Lulu knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't back down, not when the future of Dante's son was at stake. Brooklyn felt the world closing in around her, every carefully built defense crumbling beneath the weight of Lulu's relentless pursuit of the truth. She had fought so hard to control the narrative, to keep Joe's true parentage buried, but now, Lulu was threatening to undo everything. The thought of losing control over Joe's fate was unbearable, and Brooklyn wasn't about to let that happen without a fight. Lulu had crossed a line. At least, that's how Brooklyn saw it. She had no right to interfere, no right to dictate what was best for Gio when she had only just learned the truth. Who was she to come in and disrupt everything, acting as if she had all the answers? Rage boiled within Brooklyn as she realized that Lulu wasn't going to stop, not until Joe's place in Dante's life was acknowledged, and the Quartermain influence over him was permanently changed. Brooklyn knew how to fight. She had spent her entire life proving herself, clawing her way through Quartermain politics, surviving scandal after scandal. But this wasn't just about saving her own skin. This was about protecting Gio. Or at least, that's what she kept telling herself. The reality was far more complicated. Part of her feared losing him, not just to Dante, but to the truth itself. If Lulu exposed everything, Joe's entire world would shift, and there was no predicting how he would handle it. Would he resent her? Would he turn away from the life she had fought so hard to maintain for him? But as much as she wanted to believe that Lulu was the real problem, the truth was gnawing at Brooklyn from the inside. She had made the choice to keep this secret, to let Dante live his life without knowing his own son, and now, she was paying the price. Lulu, meanwhile, was facing her own struggle. She had never intended to turn this into a war, but she couldn't ignore what she knew. Gio deserved to know his father. Dante deserved to know his son. She had tried to reason with Brooklyn, to make her see that this wasn't about revenge or control, it was about doing the right thing. But Brooklyn refused to listen, and now, the situation had escalated into something far worse. Dante, caught between them, was exhausted by the constant tension. The truth had already shaken him to his core, but now, watching Lulu and Brooklyn go head-to-head over the future of a child he barely knew was pushing him to the breaking point. He had spent years believing his life was set in one direction, only for everything to change overnight. He wasn't just dealing with the revelation that he had a son, he was also watching two women he cared about go to war over what that meant. Every conversation with Lulu turned into an argument. She was relentless, insistent that Dante step up, that he take action, that he acknowledged Gio in a way that couldn't be undone. She wanted legal protections, formal recognition. Things Dante hadn't even had time to process yet. And every time he hesitated, she saw it as him failing to do the right thing. Brooklyn, on the other hand, was desperate to hold on to the life she had built. She refused to let Lulu come in and tear it apart, refused to let Dante be swayed by Lulu's determination. But the cracks were already forming. Dante was withdrawing, tired of the never-ending battle, tired of being pushed in every direction, tired of having to choose sides. And then, Brooklyn snapped. The tension had been building for too long, and Lulu had pushed her too far. She lashed out, anger and desperation colliding into something explosive. Words turned into accusations, accusations turned into threats, and before Lulu could react, Brooklyn had crossed a dangerous line. Lulu was in trouble now. Brooklyn's attack, whether physical, verbal, or legal, would have consequences neither of them could predict. What started as a battle over Joe's rights had now become deeply personal. And Dante? He was caught in the middle, watching everything fall apart, unsure if there was even a way to fix it. Because after this, there was no going back. Lulu was determined to win Dante back, to rebuild what they had lost, to remind him that what they had was once unshakable. But the reality was much more complicated than she had anticipated. Time had changed everything, Dante had moved on, and no matter how much she wanted to fight for their love, there were forces working against her at every turn. At first, Lulu believed that all she needed was time. She thought that if she could just remind Dante of what they once had, if she could just get through to him, he would realize that they still belonged together. But the more she pushed, the further he pulled away. His hesitation wasn't just confusion, it was resistance. Dante had spent years grieving Lulu, learning to live without her, convincing himself that she was never coming back. And now, even though she was standing right in front of him, he wasn't sure if he could let himself go back to that place again. Lulu, however, refused to give up. She had lost too much already, and the thought of losing Dante permanently was unbearable. But as she fought to reclaim their love, she started to see something in Dante's eyes that terrified her. It wasn't just hesitation anymore, it was anger. Dante wasn't just unsure about being with Lulu again, he resented her. It was a slow realization, one that hit Lulu like a devastating blow. Dante had spent too long trying to put the pieces of his life back together. He had worked through the pain of losing her, of raising their children without her, of forcing himself to believe that she was gone forever. And now, her return had ripped open every old wound, but not in the way she had hoped. Instead of being relieved, instead of feeling like he had been given a second chance, Dante felt robbed. He was furious that he had spent years thinking she was lost to him, furious that he had been forced to move on, furious that she had come back and expected everything to fall into place as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. And now, instead of feeling grateful for her return, Dante saw her as a ghost from his past who had come back to haunt him. The more Lulu tried to hold on to him, the more Dante rejected her. Every conversation turned into an argument. Every attempt she made to bring them closer only widened the distance between them. Lulu was trying to rebuild something that Dante no longer wanted. And worse, Lulu wasn't just fighting against time, she was fighting against herself. She thought that love alone would be enough to bring them back together, but what she didn't realize was that Dante had been forced to let go of her a long time ago, and he wasn't sure if he could go back. And with Brooklyn's betrayal, Joe's existence, and the tangled mess of emotions Dante was dealing with, the last thing he wanted was more chaos. Lulu had believed that her love for Dante would be enough to save them. But what if it was actually the very thing destroying them? What if Dante wasn't just pulling away? What if he had started to hate her for coming back at all? Lulu had come back hoping to reclaim the love of her life. But now, she was beginning to realize that she might have lost him forever. Dante had always carried the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but nothing had ever prepared him for the storm that was now unraveling before him. The revelation that Gio was his son had shifted everything he thought he knew about his life, his past, and his future. It wasn't just about learning to be a father to a son he never knew existed, it was about stepping into a battle that had already begun long before the truth came to light. Gio was at the center of a power struggle that he barely understood, and with every passing day, Dante could feel the danger growing closer. His son wasn't just another kid in Port Charles, he was a Cassadine by blood, a Quartermain by association, and now, a Falconary by name. That kind of legacy came with enemies, expectations, and a history of destruction. Dante could already see Joe's restlessness, the way he struggled to process the truth about his identity, the way he wanted to prove himself in a world that had been shaping him long before he even knew who he was. Gio wasn't just adjusting, he was fighting. Fighting against the unknown, against the people who had hidden the truth from him, against the reality that his entire life had been a lie. And now, Emma had stepped into the chaos as well. Emma had always been the kind of girl who saw the best in people, but with Gio, it was different. She wasn't just drawn to him out of curiosity, she understood him. She saw his anger, his need to belong, his desperation to carve out a place for himself in a world that suddenly felt foreign to him. And despite all the danger, despite all the warning signs, she refused to walk away. But Emma's involvement only made things worse. She was a Drake, a Scorpio, a part of a family that had been fighting against the Cassadine influence for generations. And now, here she was, falling into the orbit of a boy who was unknowingly tangled in that same dangerous web. Dante could feel the danger closing in, but Lulu was only making things worse. Lulu had convinced herself that she was the only one who could protect Gio, that she was the only one who could ensure that he got what he deserved. But what she didn't realize was that she was walking straight into the fire. She had already gone too far. Her insistence on fighting for Joe's rights had painted a target on her back. Brooklyn saw her as a threat, a woman who was trying to rewrite the life that she had built for Gio, and Brooklyn wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. But Brooklyn wasn't the only one watching. The Cassadines had kept their distance for now, but Dante knew better than to believe that they would stay out of this for long. Gio was one of them, whether he wanted to be or not, and they had a history of reclaiming what they believed was theirs. If Lulu kept pushing, if she kept inserting herself into this battle, she wasn't just going to get hurt, she was going to put Gio, Emma, and even Dante himself in danger. Dante could feel his patience slipping. He had spent his life protecting people, but now, he was watching Lulu walk headfirst into a disaster that he might not be able to save her from. And worst of all, Lulu didn't see it. She was too caught up in her mission, too determined to fight for what she believed was right, too blinded by her need to be the one who fixed everything. Dante had tried reasoning with her. He had tried warning her. He had begged her to back down. But Lulu wasn't listening. She didn't see the full picture. She didn't see how Brooklyn's desperation was turning dangerous. She didn't see how the Cassadines were already watching. She didn't see how Gio was on the verge of making a mistake that could ruin everything. And she certainly didn't see how her obsession with controlling the situation was pushing Dante away. Dante wasn't sure how much longer he could keep fighting against her. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep cleaning up the messes that were forming around them. Because Lulu thought she was protecting Gio, but in reality, she was leading him straight into disaster. And when the moment came, when everything exploded, Dante wasn't sure if he would be able to pull her out in time.